Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in. As you can see, this is a bit of a longer video. I just want to give a quick introduction, say this is my attempt at giving back to the community. People can see what it's like to be a client of mine, going over world events and how their portfolios may be affected. With all that said, please, this is definitely something meant to be listened to. If you would like to watch, there is some good stuff in here. And outside of that, I hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Thank you for watching. Please sit back, relax, and tune in. Have a good one. All right, everybody. Good evening. It's a pleasure to have everyone joining me tonight. I actually filmed this, or something similar to this, the other day, last Friday, but it wasn't very good. I was pretty hot. The apartment was hot. I was pretty hungry. I couldn't really think straight. And obviously this is not something I'm good with, so I got a lot of practice Friday. I think I'll be able to have a refined, polished version of what Friday was today. I'm feeling a little more clear-headed and to the point, so we'll get right into it. What this basically is, I'm going to be naming this the Insider Review, Atlantic Financial's Insider Review, because I want to kind of put out there what it's like to be a client of mine, what it looks like to be behind or on the other side of those doors, because a lot of times what clients are looking for is answers to what's going on in the world and how their portfolios might be affected. And I believe that this will be one of the best ways to do that without running into any compliance issues. So with that said, I will actually start with a quick note, with a quick disclosure. The content in this video is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. Any discussions of interest rates, monetary policy, or economic trends reflects my personal speculation and opinion at the time of recording and may not account for developments after this video was made. Nothing here constitutes financial, investment, tax, or legal advice. Past economic trends are not indicative of future outcomes. Always do your own research and consult a licensed financial professional before making any investment or financial decisions. So, with that said, we're going to get right into it. So, a big thing that people are looking to understand is inflation. And there's going to be a whole separate, slide that I'll be putting up, but really what inflation we're seeing today has a lot to do with, number one, the money being printed, but number two, the current conflict in the Middle East, which I did not want to talk about because it's been on the tip of everybody's tongues for the last 2 or 3 months now, however long this is going on. Unfortunately, we will kind of have to get into that, but that'll be a little bit later. We're going to start with some of the inflation news. So, kind of putting the cart before the horse here, but a lot of the headlines last week, Canada saw their consumer index rise like 1%. People are cutting back on consumer spending, yet it went up about 1%. Korea's rates are looking like they're going to go up. That's what Korea's banks are signaling. And then you also had Spain and France saying that their consumer prices have risen, which could lead to an increase in the interest rate. So a lot of signals that the interest rate is going to be increasing. And Kevin Warsh, which was kind of my top story that I wanted to have last Friday. I'm just going to kind of summarize this today, not to go over it, because I know that not everybody has all the time in the world to listen to this. But Kevin Warsh, he's the new Fed chair. He was brought in last month. What you want to really know about him is, number one, he was kind of taught and mentored under Milton Friedman, who, Milton Friedman is a libertarian hero. I think he has one of the best economic policies domestically. I would say, if you want to do your own research and look into these people, I've been brought over on their arguments. I think Milton Friedman has a very good, what you would call a domestic policy, and then I think Pat Buchanan's a little bit more of a realistic when it comes to foreign policy. So, maybe my perfect world will be a blend of the two, but regardless, Kevin Warsh is kind of hawkish on intervention in the market. He's more of a free market guy, which is important for everybody to understand. That's kind of where his backbone is. However, he was a governor. He's actually got a really interesting career. He was a governor on the board of the Federal Reserve at age 35, which is relatively young. I think it might be the youngest. Along with that, he was pretty hawkish his entire time there, saying, hey, look, like, we need to be careful about increasing the interest rates. He was always very vocal about not increasing the rates. However, he seemed to be a team player, I guess, from the voting records. He tended to say his piece, but he would kind of go with the flow. Now, it's important people need to understand, I actually kind of thought this was funny, Jerome Powell does not control the interest rates, and Kevin Warsh also does not control the interest rates. A lot of people get that confused because they're the ones that are speaking, on the floor, and or not on the floor, but they're the ones who are giving like the actual press conference interviews and all that. But there's a whole system that's in place. It's something like it's 7 governors and then 4 regional bank presidents. And New York is always one of them, and then it rotates 3 different bank presidents throughout, once a year, and then they'll rotate. And depending on who is in there, their votes might be a little bit hawkish, meaning they're going to be a little bit more free market. They're not going to be, I've been saying hawkish this whole time, saying he's not going to increase the interest rate. Yeah, he wants to increase the interest rate, sorry. And then you'll have people who are dovish who want to lower the interest rate, want to, put a little bit more ease on the market. And so depending on who is in there, you have some sway, but really the Fed chair's only job is to gather the data, present it to, those who are voting, and then give the debrief to the country. Fun fact, they actually vote about some of the verbiage that the Fed chair says. So poor Jerome Powell was really, I know he's kind of the leader of the pack, but his vote counted like everybody else's. And he was going up there saying what they voted to say, and he was just getting, kind of degraded every single time. So that's kind of funny, because he really didn't have much control over what he said. He did, but he was like more confined than you would imagine, and everybody who knows about it, like the situation, knows this, and everybody else is just watching him getting lambasted on TV. So a little bit funny. So, anyways. But the long story short, Kevin Warsh also did kind of change up. Apparently he's a little bit more friendly to the AI conversation, and he looks like he may be willing to loosen the rate, only because he'd rather see some more investment go into the AI space and building the data centers. My only 2 cents on that would be, I think that actually does make sense. A really short opinion on the AI conversation is, it's really difficult, it's nuanced. It's not that I'm not understanding to the fact that the government is kind of going about this blue sky venture with almost no oversight from the American people. However, you want to be altruistic, and I'd be willing to have a conversation with somebody about this to like kind of go back and forth and maybe refine my opinion a little bit more. But without having that refinement, my initial reaction would be, from somebody who's not a big fan of government intervention, I would say, it is a national security threat. It's almost like the nuclear bomb of technology in a way, internet technology. So, whoever kind of gets there first, there's no really defending that, and there's almost no getting on top of that hill, because whatever technology can access every piece of everybody else's technology, go through every firewall, can also build in its own firewalls and defenses, preventing other people from attaining that level of sophistication. So that's something to think about. Again, I'm open to refining my position, but as of right now, I'd say, yeah, it is a national security threat. Extra funding there is, warranted, and people should be able to push back a little bit more on this. I'm not saying that it should be as open season as it is, but I definitely think that we need to move fast. So. And that's not the whole point of today's conversation, but that is my 2 cents, just to give people something to chew on. But we don't know what Kevin's going to do. I will say it's a lot harder to loosen the interest rate when there's this much overwhelming data that it should at least stay the same or rise. Mainly due to the fact that you're seeing prices increase across the board, across every country. the response to this almost has to be you increase the interest rates. And that's kind of a little bit scary, because we also see, and this has been reported a few times now, we're seeing a rise in delinquencies of American credit, specifically credit card debt. The last time we saw this was in 2010, and we're approaching those levels today. It's not record-breaking levels, but it is a steep rise. I'm going to be honest, the effects of people not paying their debt are significant. It's a really big indicator, but right now we are living in a world where debt isn't what it used to be. It's not the titan of, life-crushing. I'm not putting it into good words, but it's not what it used to be. We've already had our debt downgraded, I believe, last year or the year before. We're approaching 2010 limits. It's really, we just got to see what happens from here. If it's a recession, who knows, really. So, because one of the things, I don't want to put a firm foot down on it, because I believe there's a tendency to have irrationality in the markets. And when you see debt going up, you're going to see a lot of people who are going to say, hey, look, that's going up. We got to freak out. We need to close ourselves off to the market. And it just might not react the way people think it will. That's not to say you should do one thing or the other at all. That is to say that we don't know what's going to happen. So, I don't want to get too much into my models and how I utilize them and what they can do. But what I would say is that, fortunately for me in the positions that I take and the research that I utilize, sometimes the portfolio structures that I have don't respond as a one-to-one correlation to the market. So when the market does kind of suffer a little bit, there are opportunities for my position to appreciate. Not every time, not a guarantee, but it's more than some of the models that I initially employed earlier in my career. So again, I don't want to get too much into that. That could be a compliance issue that I just don't feel like brushing up against. But the delinquencies of rising in American debt, that's more, I would say what you're going to see from that is it's more of a social indicator than anything else. People giving up, people aren't going out and and maybe they are, which is also arguably worse, but there's a rising tide right now. And it is interesting. So another stat you can look at is generally somewhere around half to 6 out of 10 people throughout all of life, or as current recorded history, they've had mainly people living paycheck to paycheck. It's a human tendency that 3 to 4 out of 10 people will actually kind of save or be in a position where they have excess cash coming in. So we're just running up against one of those times, and that's what you see when you see economies shift, is when these norms kind of start breaking and cresting over, and credit card delinquencies. I could find the chart, but we've never been at 100% no delinquency rate. There's always a portion of people, and so that average, it is a stark rise. It is concerning because it means that people's daily lives are becoming more and more stressful, and maybe people are giving up, and maybe they're like, all right, I don't even care about the debt anymore. Or conversely, which is the scarier alternative, they're working 2 or 3 jobs and they just can't meet that debt threshold. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. It's concerning. But one of the other things I want to speak about on this inflation topic is the fact that earlier I mentioned Canada's consumer, or I believe it's their retail index, increased about 1% last month. And they came out and said this isn't from any type of appreciation. What it's from is the fact that things are costing more. And I may put in kind of a chart. If I am, I'm inserting it right now. If I'm not, you're still here with me, and I'm just kind of going to go over this ad lib. But, let's try and take something made out of China. And we're going to use TVs, although I'd rather pick something that's a little bit more of a common commodity, maybe pens. But let's just say China sources everything for its pens within China. This does work out really well too, and this will segue into the war in the Middle East. But right now, China gets about 80% of its energy from, I don't know if it's Iran specific, and I should look that up, but they're sourcing it from channels that go through the Strait of Hormuz, which, as everybody knows right now, is pretty much blockaded, and few to none ships are making it through. So 80% of their oil comes out of there. Now it's not. Oil costs go up in China. That's the first thing we need to know. So for a pen to be made, we'll just use two parts, the plastic and the ink. So let's say the plastic is sourced from one region in the north of China, the ink is sourced from central China, and it's manufactured in eastern China. All right. So in and around China, you have three separate areas. So you're using the equipment to source the plastic or refine the plastic from the oil. You have, I don't know if ink is sourced directly from oil either, but wherever the ink's getting sourced from, you have equipment generating that. The electricity cost, the oil cost, that's being factored in. Next, you have the transportation cost from both of those to the fabrication facility where they're putting the pens together, and maybe even some of the metal, ballpoint pen, maybe it's bronze. I actually don't know what they use for it, but some type of metal that gets sourced and mined, and then that's also brought to the same manufacturing facility. So just alone in China, if people are going to that manufacturing facility to pick up the pens, it's still going to cost more, right? So on that Chinese companies, this hypothetical company's balance sheet, they would actually see an appreciation. Now, it wouldn't be the same type of appreciation because their costs would have gone up, so they would have increased their profit margins for sale, right? But they would see that their total production went up as a dollar figure, right? So then those pens are packaged, they're transported, and they're transported via sea or air to Canada, likely sea, and they're going all the way across the Pacific Ocean to a Canadian port. One Canadian port, right? All those pens are offloaded. Those workers then transport them by truck all across Canada. And once you get all the way to eastern Canada, you know what I mean? That's a long truck drive. I'm making this a little bit, more than probably how it goes. There's probably a little bit more efficiency in this, but I'm just trying to get the point across. So you can see oil was used mainly for transportation all across, and from beginning to end, these companies are going to see their dollar figures increase. There's more expenses to it, yes, but the profit margins stay the same, and that price is, pushed onto the consumer. And you could, I would say it's not arguable. The price is also pushed onto everybody in that supply chain, but the end result is it hits the consumer. It's the consumer who, everybody sees it. It's the consumer who hits the headlines because that's just how things work. But it's not necessarily the company's fault. I would say maybe, now is a right time for companies to take advantage. Maybe companies' profit margins through, inflation was generally slow, ranging anywhere from 2 to 3%. So, over the course of time, now that they have this good excuse to, maybe perform shrinkflation or inflate their prices and maintain the same product, maybe they inflated their prices more than what was necessary. But again, these are company strategies, right? They might be looking and saying, well, there's no way the government's going to get this inflation under control, so let's kind of front load our prices. We'll adjust for inflation, we'll over adjust for inflation, and then the consumer will be used to these prices, and then we'll kind of settle in when we believe that things will get under control. And it's interesting, I won't say the names, and I did say it last time. I am just realizing this is a separate point, but soda companies did do this. And I'm not going to get into the specific soda companies, they may be largely known, but they did have this issue. One soda company back when inflation was really prevalent, one soda company did do this small incremental move with inflation. You know, they saw things were coming, and then the other soda company tried to, you know, maintain their prices, and eventually they couldn't take it anymore. I don't think they ever came out and actually said this, but it was known in the pricing. It was talked about. They just took this drastic jump and said they can't. I mean, I'm sure they said they can't take it anymore, and they just jumped in price, and it actually hurt them. Even though their competitor was slowly raising their price inconsistently, it hurt the other company because they went from, you know, X dollars per unit to, you know, plus like 3X, you know, so it was crazy. But, you know, it's interesting to see companies strategize. And here's the really interesting part. So circling back to the pens in Canada, that pen company on paper is actually going to show growth. And this is one of the reasons why the United States has had a positive GDP for all these years, even though you, as the American consumer, or American citizen or producer, we've all started to feel the strain of inflation. And we've all started to cut back on our spending in one way or another, yet the economy and the stock market are appreciating, and our GDP is appreciating. And how is that? Well, that's exactly the reason why. We also injected all this money, and I am going to put a chart up. You can see this is the M2 money supply. And that drastic jump right there is when they injected all this money into the money supply. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing the stock market appreciate, because we keep pumping in money. And I'll probably do a little bit more on this because it is interesting to go through and see what money printing looked like from the Fed's own data. You know, if you look here, you can see it's from 1960 to 1970, the curve is relatively flat, and as we move along, you can kind of see this exponential curve start to grow until you see today. Now, the good news is it does seem that there was some serious action to reduce this, because also threatening the US dollar is a national security threat, and that's a whole topic for another day. I do believe it's one of the reasons why we are engaged in the Middle East with Iran, one among many. And, you know, I'm not going to state the obvious here, but I will say there's more than just one reason. And I guess that is a good segue now into Iran. So, to proceed this conversation and to proceed what's happened, Iran with Russia and China agreed to a trilateral agreement the year before, last year, saying, yeah, look, we're basically gonna become allies with energy and yada this and yada that. And so that's one of the things that preceded this. Now, the United States, as everybody knows, is backed by the petrodollar. We got off the gold standard. Again, that's another topic. I have noticed, talking about these things, that there's a lot of other topics that deserve their own videos outright, and that's one of them. So if you see me mention that again, it's going to be a bad habit, but it is true. So anyways, the United States will absolutely defend its power by holding the world's reserve currency. It is extremely important, and that was threatened. And not only that, and I might take a quick break, probably not, because I do like kind of ad-libbing and it makes my life easier. But at one point last year, it's right here. Right here, if you read right here, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. There was an oil deal done not with the US dollar. And maybe I'll follow up with a stat also right here with, you know, how often that occurs and when the last time that occurred. But I do know this past one was significant because they bought oil without the US dollar. Along with that, Russia and China with some other countries made the BRICS currency a failed attempt basically at having a gold-backed currency. And I do believe that that might be one of the reasons for the incursion with Ukraine also, because Russia was a big player in that. But we're not here today to talk about Russia or China. What you need to know too about Iran is they have multiple different assets, military assets there, and assets isn't a good word, but multiple different individual militaries. So when the United States conducted their policies in the Middle East, they had a very apparent strategy of going toward the leadership, dismantling the leadership, and then flowing down to everybody else. We even saw that in Venezuela. We did see that in Iran, and honestly, Iran's plans kind of went exactly how they wanted them to, because they have a decentralized military, similar to, God forbid somebody attacked the United States in that way. We would have the National Guard. It'd be like 50 different armies, decentralized armies in the United States. Now, I really don't want to go down this rabbit hole because the comparisons are a little bit daunting, and I know I'll forget one and I'll be thinking about it, but against my own advice, I'll go through it. Iran is actually very similar to Germany in the First World War. Germany didn't invade anybody. They weren't aggressive to anybody. They were building up a fleet of ships. Britain didn't like that, and so they threatened them, and it almost sparked World War I. As we all know, it was Archduke Franz Ferdinand that did that, and ironically, it was when Britain went to celebrate with Germany that they got the news that Archduke was assassinated, and they actually sent Britain home early. And Britain sent a telegram to the Germans saying, "Friends today, friends tomorrow, friends forever." And I believe it was like a week or a month they had started pushing troops to fight World War I. So that's a fun fact for you. But Iran is very similar. So Iran, although they've been maybe a little more aggressive in the rhetoric, the Germans weren't aggressive in the rhetoric. They actually aspired to be like the British, to build their fleet up. But the British were, and that's again, that has a lot to do with, what I was talking about earlier with currency and the petrodollar. But suffice to say, British said absolutely not. Are you going to threaten our ability to be the world superpower for trade and governing the seas? So that was like their existential threat to power, and that's why they were so serious about it. And Iran is in a similar position. They never really invaded anybody. I don't think they've invaded anybody for like 250 years. I could be wrong, and maybe, under the Ottoman Empire, if, you look at that, maybe there's like some nuances, but I know for a long time they haven't invaded anybody. They haven't crossed their borders. They've had pretty extreme rhetoric. They fight through proxies, which is true, but Iran proper hasn't invaded. So do with that what you will. Again, I'm drawing similarities, not, the biggest differences. Forget where I was going with this. Iran, like Germany was also a keystone to Europe. I'm slowly losing my train of thought. So, Iran is a decentralized country. They have multiple different armies. Now, when this conflict started, it basically went exactly to their plan. We immediately cut the head off of the snake. They lost their centralized power, and now they're struggling. We thought they would struggle and flounder, but they're not. They have 31 different militaries, all operating independently, all with the same goal of keeping the Strait shut down. Now, the big question is how is Trump going to, work with all of these different militaries? And that's why you kind of see that he's pretty ambiguous about who they're talking about, who's in power. Number one, they probably don't want that person to die outside of their control. Number two, there might be inner conflict, right, between different factions, because that's what we're dealing with. I mean, imagine if this happened to the United States and we had 50 different factions. There's also going to be some internal conflict vying for control. It's going to be easy in the beginning when you have one monster, one enemy to fight, but then slowly the other factions are going to try and vie for control for the whole country. So that, combined with the fact that they may be cut off from China, and China really won't be able to do much because they're sourcing most of their energy from the Strait, you're really going to see Iran push more towards Russia eventually. So that's kind of going to be the big deal. Along with that, these people they're not what would you say? They're not soft. They're very hardened. The country's been through some pretty legitimate sanctions and pretty ostracized from the world through trade. There's a lot of mischief that's gone on within their country, and that's played with their infrastructure for a long time. I think it's been something like almost a year, if not 6 months, of them having like no AC in the desert. So and with all that said, when they were threatened to be blown out of existence, they still showed up on the bridges. And you can say that there's going to be some extremists of every group that'll show up and do that. But at the end of the day, these people have been pushed for a long time. And they're exhausted. And they still showed up. So whatever fraction, if it is a fraction, if it is a small fraction of the population is willing to do that, it's still a large turnout. So I wouldn't say that the government doesn't care about them. I don't even think they really, from the reports, have the best functioning high-level government. It may be that we're dealing with a more decentralized situation. So I'm kind of speaking a little bit over my skis here, and I could be wrong about that. And if I am, please, somebody let me know. But really, I don't think there's going to be much of an end to this conflict. The good news is that this is securing our seat at the table for the petrodollar. Basically, the BRICS, and this kind of wraps up everything. If you look at it, the BRICS currency is a thing of the past. That's absolutely not happening anytime soon. And then, with the threats to the petrodollar, specifically to the oil reserve that we have, that's no longer really a thing anymore anyways, because now we're sourcing a lot of oil from the Western Hemisphere. And you can kind of start seeing how these things play out. And this is one of the things that I've been thinking about for a while. Obviously, we have a dominant narrative in the news, and I'm not going to say it doesn't have its place. But what I will say is it's a little bit extreme, and it's not taking into account some of the other figures. Trump was looking towards Greenland pretty aggressively. Very aggressively, he took Venezuela, and it seems like their government's playing ball with us. Put a lot of eyes on the Gulf of America by renaming it, and he's been a very big internal oil guy with the pipeline. I forget what it's called, but he's one of those guys who cares very much about sourcing oil from the Western Hemisphere. And he's seen that the strategy from the East is to undermine our currency, both through having a gold-backed currency and through doing oil deals and energy deals outside of the US dollar. So he absolutely, I say we as a nation probably can't let that, and there's a good word for it, paradigm, we can't let that paradigm shift and lose control of our reserve as the oil dollar. So with that said, that's kind of going to wrap up everything. That's pretty much the show. Insider review. This is a little bit longer. For most clients, I will say I probably would have broken this down into some more short form summaries, but this is meant to be listened to. Absolutely. Some of the stuff, we have the map there and you can take a look at it, but we'll even see if that's in this. I'm kind of speaking out loud. I probably shouldn't be saying this stuff because I'm going to have to do a bunch of edits and cuts, but so thank you for listening. If you made it this far, please share it. This is kind of a passion project of mine. I've always wanted to do something long form. I listen to a lot of talk shows myself. I read a lot of news. I'm a bit of a political junkie. And this is one of the things that I find fascinating about my job is kind of looking at world events and seeing how they affect what I do for a living. So with all that said, I mainly should be doing these on Fridays. I don't know when this is going to come out. It's 7:09 on Monday night, so maybe this comes out on Tuesday. I don't know. But whenever this does come out, please feel free to share it. That does a lot for me. And I hope everybody has a good rest of the night. Probably look for another one of these on Friday. And yeah, have a good one.